Hello and welcome to another lesson in this tutorial. In this lesson, we're going to be going over bar numbers and rehearsal marks. Now, I don't know why, but I've very frequently encountered scores, particularly amateur scores, that have either no bar numbers and rehearsal marks at all, or just very, very few rehearsal marks. And this is really a terrible idea. It makes rehearsals significantly more frustrating and time-consuming. And so I thought that it was something that definitely needs to be addressed. So let's start with bar numbers. By default, Sibelius displays bar numbers at the beginning and top of each system. I personally find this a very good idea. It's convenient, it's neat, it usually doesn't get in the way of anything else. But if you'd like to change this default, we can do this on the right-hand side of the Text tab. We can force our bar numbers to display at any interval that we desire, or we can even turn them off completely. And next to this, we can also change our bar numbers, and that'll open up a window for us. But we can also arrive at this same window by double-clicking on a current bar number in our score. Now, you might need this if, for example, your piece is divided into separate movements, because you're not going to want the bar numbers to just keep counting throughout all of the movements. Now, everything in this window is rather self-explanatory, so I won't go into too much detail, but you can see here that we have quite a few options available to us, and can even add text to a bar number if we really need to. And the great thing about bar numbers is that they can simply be hidden as with any other object. Now, there are a couple of even more specific things that we can change regarding bar numbers in the Engraving Rules window. Engraving Rules can be found under the Appearance tab, and the shortcut is Ctrl+Shift+E. Now, we haven't actually talked about the Engraving Rules window yet in our tutorial, but here we have the power to change an awful lot of really neat things. It's definitely worth having a poke around in here. And as a general rule of thumb, if you're ever fiddling around with or formatting an object in Sibelius and need to do something very specific or would like to know what can be done with that object, go to the Engraving Rules window and check things out there first. There is a good chance that what you are looking for will be here. So if we go to bar numbers on the left-hand side, you can see that we have all sorts of different options available to us. Again, here too we can decide where to display our bar numbers, but we also have several more options. We can display them at the beginning of sections, we can hide them at rehearsal marks, which is what I personally prefer to do. We can have them count any repeats in our music, and we can also display them at multirests. And I'm going to show you this last one in action. But to do this, obviously, I'm first going to have to turn on multirests. When I go back to my score, I can turn multirests on and off in the Layout tab in the Breaks section, or just use the hotkey Ctrl+Shift+M. And now with my multirests on, you can currently see that my multirests have no bar numbers listed. But if I go back to Engraving Rules, I can turn this on. And now you can see that the bar numbers are displayed on the left-hand side of my multirests. But in Engraving Rules again, we can change this to a much more aesthetically pleasing option by selecting Center Range on Multirest, which will then display the bar numbers underneath and in the middle of the multirest. This can be particularly useful and helpful during rehearsals to instrumentalists who have very long breaks. Back in Engraving Rules, you'll also see that we can choose which staves to display the bar numbers on. Not to mention that we also have a portal to change their text style, and we can also change their horizontal and vertical positions. But I would say that's enough for bar numbers for the moment. Let's move on to rehearsal marks. Now, if your score has well-marked bar numbers, for example, at the beginning of each system, you won't necessarily need rehearsal marks, but I would still recommend that you use them. You see, the biggest difference between bar numbers and rehearsal marks is that rehearsal marks signify that a new section in the music has begun, and therefore an appropriate or convenient place to start playing during rehearsals. The rehearsal marks, in other words, also help the musicians to identify the structure and form of a piece of music. I guess that in a way you could say that rehearsal marks almost have a musical function, because they help the interpreter to understand the musical structure. In Sibelius, we can add a rehearsal mark via the Text tab, or we can use the hotkey Ctrl+R. Now you can see that Sibelius's default setting for rehearsal marks is to use letters. Now we can change this default in the Engraving Rules window under Rehearsal Marks. We could instead, for example, use a number system, but I would advise you not to do this if your score also uses bar numbers. Having two number systems will be highly confusing in the rehearsals. Now, I've spent countless hours working closely with all kinds of ensembles and orchestras, and during rehearsals I often hear conductors having to say things like, "Let's start at 7 bars before letter F," or "Please play softer in the 5th bar of letter M." And I always think to myself, wouldn't it just be easier for everyone if we were only working with bar numbers? If you could just say, "Let's start at bar 108. So after years and years of experience, here is what I believe to be the most practical and confusion-free way of setting up bar numbers and rehearsal marks. I would say, leave the bar number default in place so that the bar numbers are displayed at the beginning of each system, as you can see here. But in the Engraving Rules, change the rehearsal marks so that they display the bar numbers. And this way, you have the best of both worlds. There's only one counting system based on the bar numbers, which means the conductor isn't mentioning letters and then bar numbers and then switching back to letters again, so there's no confusion. But at the same time, because particular bar numbers are being displayed as rehearsal marks, as you can see here, they show the musicians how the music is structured and where the individual musical sections begin. But, as always, this is of course just my own opinion, and you're free to take it or leave it. One thing, however, goes without question, and that is that you definitely need something. The more information you can give the instrumentalists and the conductor, the better off you're going to be.